Okay, so let's unpack this concept right off the bat. The word utopia. We throw it around a lot, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. It is pretty much the go-to word.
Right, it's the go-to word when we're describing a perfect world or a paradise. Basically the ultimate finish line for human society. But here is where it gets really interesting for you listening. If you actually go back to the Greek roots of the word, which is autotopos, it doesn't actually mean good place.
No, it doesn't. It literally translates to no place.
No place, which just feels like a cosmic joke, honestly.
Yeah. It is the ultimate irony of social engineering, I think. You are trying to build a structure that by its very definition is an imaginary island. It's a theoretical construct.
Right.
And that etymology is crucial because it implies that such a place doesn't and perhaps cannot ever exist in reality. Yeah. It is essentially a ghost before you even lay the first brick.
And yet the 20th century was absolutely defined by people who looked at that definition and just said, challenge accepted. People who were willing to bet their lives and their children's lives on the idea that they could force this no place into actual existence. So for today's deep dive, we aren't just looking at the broad strokes of history. We are conducting a really granular forensic audit of one of the most ambitious and radical attempts to build utopia, the Israeli Kibbutz movement.
Yes. Specifically, we are zooming in on a very remote settlement in northern Israel. It's called Kibbutz Eldar, and it was founded in 1949.
And to guide us through this, we have a source text today that is frankly unlike anything else we've covered on this deep dive. It's titled The Last Reign by Edeet Ravel. Now, this isn't some dry history textbook.
Not at all. It is a mosaic. It's almost like a dossier.
Yeah, it feels like someone just handed us a cardboard box of evidence they found in an attic. You have the primary narrative voice of a 5-year-old girl. Her name's Dori. But then shuffled in between her memories, like playing cards, you have archival documents.
You have official committee meeting minutes.
Right. Clinical baby diaries.
Yeah. And even scripts from plays that were written by the members themselves. It creates this incredibly jagged kaleidoscopic effect.
It really does.
Because on one page, you have the high-altitude ideology of the adults, the founders, writing these lofty manifestos about saving the human spirit. And then mere paragraphs later, you have the visceral and sometimes scary reality of a child on the ground who is literally just trying to survive the night without wetting the bed.
That is the core tension here. That's the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring the collision between the new man ideology of these documents and the actual human cost of trying to re-engineer childhood.
Exactly.
We're looking at a community that actively tried to abolish the nuclear family. They tried to abolish private property and essentially abolish the private self.
All while living on the ruins of a war zone, mind you. It is a fascinating study in human resilience, absolutely. But it's also a deep cautionary tale about what happens when you prioritize the collective over the individual. Especially when that individual is 5 years old and just wants a hug.
So let's set the board for you. It is 1949. Where exactly is Kibbutz Eldar?
We are in the Upper Galilee. This is the extreme north of Israel, right on the jagged border with Lebanon. Geographically speaking, it is high, it is windy, and it is incredibly isolated.
And who are the people crazy enough to drag mattresses up a mountain in 1949? Because they aren't locals?
No, they aren't. That is the first really crucial detail you need to understand. These are young American Jews. We are talking about kids from Los Angeles, from Chicago, from New York.
Wow.
Yeah, they belong to a socialist youth movement called the Young Guard.
So you have these city kids, people who grew up with department stores and paved roads and diners, suddenly just dropping themselves onto a rocky hilltop in the Middle East.
Precisely. And they aren't moving into brand new quarters either. They're moving into the ruins of an abandoned Arab village. The source material includes this incredible log from a document called Our First Year. It was written in January 1949.
I read that part.
It describes the arrival in brutal detail. They are unloading iron beds and straw mattresses and toothbrushes directly into what they call hovels, or essentially ruins.
The weather plays a huge character in this story, too. It's not just whether it's an active antagonist.
It's relentless. There's snow, there's mud that literally sucks the boots off your feet, bitter wind that cuts right through the walls. They have no electricity, no running water, and very little bread or food. But, and here is where this source gets really fascinating, the tone of the log isn't complaining.
No, it's ecstatic.
Exactly. It's triumphant.
The log writer actually describes the misery as indescribably exciting. which is wild to think about.
Well, that is the drug of ideology right there. They firmly believed they were the vanguard of history. They weren't just farming. They were, to quote their recruitment appeal directly here, tearing down the cracked and crumbling mausoleum of bourgeois society.
Right.
They believed they were forging a new man and a new child. So the physical suffering was almost a badge of honor for them. It was proof that they were doing something real and revolutionary.
But they were building this new world on top of a very, very old one. There's this fascinating insert in the source about the archaeology of Eldar. It's like a layer cake of civilizations.
It really is staggering when you look at it. The source lists them out, and you just see the weight of history. You have the Hyksos from the Bronze Age at the bottom.
And then the Canaanites.
Yes, and the source notes darkly that the Canaanites had altars for child sacrifice right there on that same hill.
Unbelievable.
Then you layer on the Israelites, the Assyrians, the Romans, the Byzantines, Crusaders, Mamelukes, Ottomans.
And then the British, and then the Arabs who left in 1948, and finally at the very top of the dirt, these American kibbutzniks.
It puts their new start into a very humbling perspective.
Yeah.
The source mentions that when they dug the foundation for their communal dining hall, they literally ran into Hyksos graves. They are eating their dinner on top of 4,000 years of dead empires. It makes the grandiosity of that first-year log feel very fleeting in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a specific incident in those first-year logs that really highlights this abrupt transition from the old occupants to the new, the mosque incident. This felt like a pivotal moment for the community's whole psychology to me.
It really is. It's dated January 1949. The village mosque was still standing when the kibbutzniks arrived. It was a dominant feature of the skyline, beautiful, domed, and historic. But the army and the new government decided it had to go.
And the log writer has these really mixed feelings about it. On one hand, they describe the explosion as shattering. They watch the dome rise into the gray sky like a giant eggshell before collapsing into dust. They openly acknowledge that it's the destruction of a culture.
They do admit that. They admit they don't understand the culture they're replacing. They have this brief moment of genuine solemnity. But, and here's where the ideology kicks in like a circuit breaker, they immediately pivot to pragmatism.
Right.
The log concludes that preserving the mosque would be a useless gesture. They view it purely as a symbol of the enemy. Once it's gone, the log writer literally says, bring on the bulldozers and let's plant trees.
It's like they feel they have to wipe the slate completely clean to build their utopia. If the landscape reminds you of the past, you blow it up and plant a forest. But let's move from the buildings to the people actually living in this cleared space, specifically the children. Because this is where the experiment gets extremely personal.
This is the absolute heart of the source material. In this collective system, the nuclear family was radically redefined. Children did not live with their parents, they lived in the children's house.
I think for modern listeners, this is by far the hardest part to wrap their heads around. We are talking about Dori, who is 5 or 6 years old. She does not sleep down the hall from her mom and dad.
No. Her entire life is governed by the group and by the minder or the metapilot. The source outlines a very strict daily schedule. Wake up is handled by the minder, then communal showers, directed play, and a nap. The parents are only a very small part of the day. There is a visit in the late afternoon, usually for just 3 hours or so.
And then what?
Then they are promptly returned to the children's house for bedding down. The parents leave. The children sleep there, supervised by a night guard who patrols between the different houses, or by the minder sleeping in the separate room.
Let's talk about that minder. Dori's minder is named Shoshana. And wow, if there is a villain in Dori's life, it is Shoshana.
Shoshana represents the dark side of this utopian system. She represents the abuse of power that goes completely unchecked because of the code of silence. Dori describes Shoshana as someone who smiles warmly at the parents, especially the fathers, but completely terrorizes the children when the adults are gone.
There are some really disturbing examples in the text. The toothbrush inspection really stood out to me.
That scene is incredibly visceral. Shoshana realizes a little girl named Lulu hasn't brushed her teeth because her toothbrush is dry. So she drags Lulu back to the sink, forces all the other children to physically feel the dry toothbrush to prove the crime, and then she slaps and kicks Lulu.
And Dori says Shoshana pulls her hair and throws her on the floor. And the kicker for you listening is that Dori knows the rules of the kibbutz. She says, quote, no hitting children. That's a rule on Eldar, end quote.
But the children don't tell. Dori explicitly says she knows her father wants to believe her, and he respects her, but he just doesn't really believe the extent of it. Shoshana creates a culture of absolute fear.
Yeah.
There's another incident with the itchy spots. A boy named Elin has a bad rash. To stop him from scratching it, Shoshana ties his wrists to the metal bed frame and makes all the other children stand around and watch him.
It's heartbreaking. You have this sweeping ideology of brotherhood and equality, but inside the children's house, it's like Lord of the Flies with an authoritarian warden.
It perfectly highlights the vulnerability of children in a system where the parents have willingly ceded their authority to the collective. The parents see themselves as pioneers building a nation, so they assume the system works. They simply don't see the cruelty happening in the shower room or the dormitory.
Speaking of the parents and their authority, there is this incredible document in the source, the Education Committee meeting transcript from May 1961. This, to me, was the most shocking part of the whole text.
It connects directly back to those sleeping arrangements. The sole topic of this official meeting is the goodnight kiss.
Right, so Dori's mother, Varda, is arguing that she should be allowed to go to the children's house and tuck her daughter in.
And the committee is fiercely debating it. Not as a personal family choice, mind you, but as a matter of collective policy. Varda argues for affection and reading stories to her child. But the other committee members, like Amos and Martin, argue for equality.
Their argument is that if Varda tucks Dori in, it will cause bad feelings among the other children whose parents don't come.
Exactly. They are prioritizing the collective cohesion over a single child's individual need for comfort. They view the private act of a mother kissing her child goodnight as a direct threat to the equality of the group.
And they actually vote on it.
They do. And the result is 2 against and 1 for. The committee officially votes against allowing Varda to give Dori a goodnight kiss.
That is just mind-blowing. But the source notes that Dori is actually getting a kiss currently.
Yes.
She's the only one in the house getting one.
Yes, and that creates a really complex situation for Dori. It makes her feel a mix of triumph and deep guilt. She describes the intense anxiety of waiting for that kiss every night. She has to pretend to be asleep or beg to delay the separation. She says, quote, "I'm the only one who's allowed a goodnight kiss. It's not fair, but I need it."
Wow.
It shows that even a 5-year-old child fundamentally understands the inequality of it, but her raw emotional need overrides the collective ideology.
This brings us perfectly to the parents themselves. We see them a lot through Dori's eyes, but the source also gives us glimpses into their inner adult lives through these inserted scripts and diaries. Naphtali and Varda, or Nat and Avra as they were known back in America.
There is a really stark contrast between their public pioneer personas and their private struggles. The source includes a baby diary that was kept by Varda, and it's incredibly clinical.
It really is. It reads like a lab report. Weight 3.450. The belly button fell.
It perfectly reflects that transition from mom to communal provider. She notes feeding times, but she also notes that Dori gave up her night bottle, or perhaps was forced to give it up to fit the communal schedule. The tone feels detached, which was likely heavily encouraged. You weren't supposed to be an obsessive bourgeois mother. You were raising a child for the community.
Then we have the play excerpts in the text. The play is titled Thy Neck with Chains of Gold. This seems to be where the adults let off steam about the gritty reality of their lives.
Yes, the play is a fascinating meta-commentary on the kibbutz. It features characters clearly based on the kibbutz members themselves. Ricky is Naphtali and Rita is Varda. You also have Michael and Marina. The main themes are just bone-deep exhaustion and disillusionment. They talk endlessly about the mud, the work assignments, the total lack of privacy.
There is a scene where Ricky, the Naphtali character, talks about biological urge and running after women. It heavily hints at infidelity in the community.
It absolutely does. It suggests that the free love, or at least the loose social structures of the kibbutz, created intense sexual tensions. There's a line where a character outright says, "If I knew Avra would always be loyal, I'd make a commitment to be monogamous." It completely punctures the myth of the happy, wholesome pioneer family.
And they also mock the meeting, the weekly kibbutz governance meeting. The source describes it as sacred, but also filled with vapid speeches.
The log from 1949 actually mentions a debate that ranged from whether or not babies should be picked up when they cry, all the way to the price of onions in California.
The price of onions.
Yes, it shows the sheer bureaucratic weight of trying to run a society where literally everything is decided by committee.
It sounds so exhausting. Imagine having a committee meeting about your laundry or your groceries.
Or about whether you can kick out a homeless man who is living in your ruin.
Oh yes, Jeremiah ben Jacob, the Thane of Eldar. Who exactly is this guy?
He is the ultimate outsider in this story. He's this eccentric man living in the ruins of the old Arab village, quoting Shakespeare, specifically Macbeth, and eating garbage. He calls himself the Thane.
And naturally, there's a committee meeting about him.
Of course, it's the April 1961 transcript. The transcript shows this incredible clash between their high-minded socialist values and their harsh economic reality. Some members like Martin argue for compassion. He says if we can't find a place for the infirm, then this entire enterprise is a farce.
But others push back hard.
Right. Naphtali argues that they are not a hobo camp and that everyone must contribute physical labor.
It really highlights the hard limits of their utopia. It's a utopia for members only, for the fit new man who works hard, not for the eccentric, non-productive outsider.
Exactly. It exposes the very real boundaries of their inclusivity.
Now, we really can't talk about this place without talking about exactly where it is. We mentioned the border earlier. The enemy is a constant looming presence in this source material.
The shadow of the conflict just hangs over everything. For little Dori, the mountains are dark and scary simply because the enemy is behind them. She doesn't understand the geopolitics, but she deeply understands the fear.
The source mentions night guards and passwords and the fear of Fedayeen infiltration. There are mines on the roads.
And we have to remember the historical context for you listening. This was 1949 and then into the 1950s. The state of Israel was brand new. Eldar was literally a military outpost before it became a kibbutz. The source even mentions that during the British Mandate, it was a headquarters for the Palestine Liberation Army.
That makes the danger so tangible. There is this haunting song Dori mentions her brother singing about the Red Rock.
Ah, yes, the Red Rock.
Petra.
Right, Petra over in Jordan. Why was this such a massive deal at the time? So Petra is this ancient, magnificent city carved entirely into red rock. But it was across the border in enemy territory in Jordan. In the 1950s, a sort of cult of bravery developed among young Israelis. The ultimate test of courage was to sneak across the border hike all the way to Petra to see the red rock and then try to come back alive.
But the source makes it clear that many of them didn't come back alive.
Correct. There is a factual insert in the text listing the real casualties. Hikers like Eitan Mintz, who were shot and killed attempting it. Yet the song Dori hears completely romanticizes and celebrates this highly dangerous journey.
And Dori, being a practical child, asks the most logical question, why go to a beautiful place if you die?
It cuts right through the romanticism, doesn't it? The adults or the older youth are just obsessed with this heroic, tragic ideal. Dori just sees the pointless waste of life. She says, what's the point of seeing something beautiful if you die the minute you see it? It's a profound clash between the Sabra hero culture and the basic survival instinct of a child.
The relationship with the Arab population is also presented as very complex in the text. It's not just a simple us versus them binary.
No, it's heavily layered. You have the abstract enemy across the border who wants to destroy them, but then you have the actual neighbors. There's a great scene where Dori and the other children take a trip to visit the nearby village of Gush Halav, or Jish.
And they are given a honeycomb by an old Arab man there.
Yes, there's real hospitality. But Dori also keenly notices the poverty, the lack of plumbing, the holes in the ground for toilets. And then you have that story in the play where the character Michael talks about hitting an Arab's goat with his truck and then trying to maintain cordial relations with the Mukhtar to smooth it over.
It's this weird, tense mix of coexistence and hostility. And then there is that powerful memory Dori has of the steamship. She remembers seeing a waiter being physically thrown out of the dining room. She asks her dad why, and he just says because he spilled soup.
But Dori doesn't buy that excuse for a second. She immediately identifies with the underdog, the person being thrown out. Even though the text doesn't explicitly say the waiter was au paron, Arab Dori links these feelings of helplessness. She clearly sees the brutal power dynamics that the adults are constantly trying to gloss over.
Let's pivot to Dori's inner world for a bit. Because amidst all this, the border guards, the communal sleeping, the mean minder, she has this incredibly rich imagination.
She survives by escaping into books. Pinocchio, Alice in Wonderland, Tarzan. And if you look closely at the text, she is constantly mapping these fictional stories onto her own real life.
Pinocchio especially seems huge for her. She talks a lot about the puppet master.
Yes, she deeply fears the puppet master. It's very easy to see Shoshana in that role, the one controlling all the strings in the children's house.
Yeah.
Dori wants to be real, just like Pinocchio does.
And Tarzan. She absolutely loves Tarzan.
Tarzan represents the ultimate strength and mastery over a hostile environment. The source actually notes that Tarzan was huge in Israel at the time. There were these local Tarzan pulps published in Hebrew where Tarzan fights Egyptians or Nazis. It's a pure power fantasy for people feeling constantly besieged.
She also connects to the Bible, the Moses and Joshua songs. It ties her to the ancient land. I really love the sensory details Dori notices too. The food on the kibbutz sounds Well, it sounds interesting.
It's very specific to that historical era of austerity. Soup bits, chocolate Libin, the skin on hot milk,
Oof, the skin on hot milk. I physically felt that when reading it.
and of course the pink pea contests.
The beet soup contest? That
Yeah.
is such a genuine, weird childhood detail.
Who can have the pinkest pea after eating beets at the dining hall? It perfectly reminds us that despite the high-pressure ideological environment, they were still just little kids finding ways to play.
But there is also a focus on hygiene and the body that feels a bit invasive in the text. The communal showers, the lack of privacy, slathering desitin on the skin, and the sexual exploration among the young children.
The source doesn't shy away from that reality at all. Dori casually mentions Ginny and Peony explorations among her peers. It directly reflects the total lack of privacy. They're always together and always exposed to one another. There is actually a darker insert in the source regarding a Sex in the Clubhouse controversy, which alludes to much later scandals in Kibbutzim about what happened when children were left unsupervised for long stretches.
Now, there's a major plot point we haven't touched on yet that explains Dori's very unique position in the kibbutz. She wasn't actually always on Eldar.
Right, the Canada interlude. Her family left Eldar for about 18 months and lived in Montreal.
And for Dori, this was like visiting another planet entirely.
A planet of unimaginable luxury. She talks about taking baths instead of freezing communal showers. She talks about soft towels and contrasts them with the rough pioneer towels of the kibbutz.
But then they came back. And the return was deeply traumatic for her.
Dori describes screaming relentlessly when she was dropped off at the children's house upon returning to Israel. She had experienced the bourgeois life of sleeping near her parents, and she absolutely refused to give it up again.
And that is exactly why she gets the kiss.
Exactly. She screamed until the entire system bent to her will. It explains her special privilege that the committee was debating. She is the exception solely because she refused to reintegrate silently. It's a really powerful lesson, honestly. Sometimes the only way to get your basic human needs met in a rigid system is to simply refuse to comply.
Dori mentions a lot that she wants to be a writer when she grows up. She climbs up on the monkey bars just to watch everyone.
She calls it seeing everything. She loves observing the world from above. She wants to figure out what people are really thinking behind their pioneer faces. This is the classic birth of the artist, the observer who stands slightly apart from the collective hive.
She has this recurring dream about the world below and the city of Yehupitz.
Yehupitz is a great detail. It's a Yiddish placeholder name for nowhere.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, in her dream, God lives there, and he looks like the friendly giant from TV. It's her own private utopia, perhaps. A place that doesn't really exist in reality, but where she can safely project her imagination and feel protected.
So bringing it all together as we wrap up, the source is titled The Last Rain.
Melkosh. As we mentioned at the start, it's the Hebrew term for the last rain of the season. But the trick is you only identify it as the last rain after it's already gone and the dry season sets in.
In the context of the book, it seems to beautifully symbolize the end of this specific intense era of childhood and the early kibbutz experiment itself. The pure innocence and the harsh hardship of that time eventually just washed away.
It feels like this deep dive isn't really just about a kibbutz in 1949. It's about the fundamental resilience of a child's spirit. The adults were actively trying to mold Dori into a new child, a perfect collective being. But she insisted on being Dori. She held fiercely onto her individuality, her need for a mother's kiss, and her private imagination.
It's the profound tension between the utopia the adults enthusiastically wrote about in their logs, the indescribable excitement, and the sometimes dark, scary dystopia that children actually felt in the children's house at night.
The source mentions this striking imagery towards the end, a wall of light and a labyrinth of sliding doors. It's a beautiful, complex image. History is a labyrinth, and we look back at these documents and try to find the code that explains it all.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We started with the theoretical idea of utopia. The well-meaning founders of Eldar were trying to build a perfect egalitarian society. But looking at that labyrinth of sliding doors and the wall of light Dori's story forces us to ask a difficult question. In the pursuit of a perfect shining society, who actually pays the price?
Is it always the most vulnerable? Is it always the children who have to suppress their basic emotional needs for the greater good of the collective?
And at the end of the day, is a society truly perfect if it cannot even tolerate a mother kissing her daughter goodnight?
That really is the ultimate question here.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into The Last Rain and the fascinating, complicated world of Kibbutz Eldar.
Keep questioning the narratives you read.
We will see you next time.